continue to do our absolute best. But for today, history is made, and we thank you for making it happen. Now, let's continue tonight with breaking Q news. We report tonight that Trump finally goes rogue as he disagrees with Fauci on the reopening of the country. We've prepared this as a package. Watch this.
Look, he wants to play all sides of the equation. But no, we're opening our country. People want it open. The schools are going to be open. I was seeing the other day Purdue, great school, great college, university. And Purdue is opening and others are opening and they're all announcing it.
President Donald Trump's repudiation of Dr. Anthony Fauci has long been probable. Once the trusted doctor warned of the human cost of Trump's push to quickly reopen the country, it became inevitable. Trump broke with Fauci today, who has served under 6 presidents, and yesterday over the infectious disease experts' warnings that getting businesses and schools back open too quickly would lead to unnecessary suffering and death.
Trump said, quote, "I was actually surprised by his answer. Actually, it's just, to me, it's not an acceptable answer, especially when it comes to schools. The delicate dynamic between Fauci and Trump has been watched for months. Its latest fraying marks the most pronounced clash yet in the tussle between science and politics that has long plagued the administration's fight against the coronavirus. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky paved the way for the president when he confronted Fauci in a hearing on Tuesday and told him he was not the end-all in decision-making on when the country should be reopened again.
It may not be a coincidence that Trump's rebuke took place after Tucker Carlson, one of the president's favorite Fox TV hosts, who laid into Fauci on Tuesday night, following earlier assaults by their colleagues such as Laura Ingraham. Fox host Tucker Carlson called Fauci the, quote, chief buffoon of the professional class. Republicans seem to agree. In a new CNN SSRS poll, 84% of Republicans say they trust Trump to give them information on the virus. Only 61% of them say they trust Fauci.
You know, I don't know how you can go along against science. It seems like lives should matter, but I come from a place where that is just a given. I had hippie parents where that is what the assumption is for me, that you have to take care of people and them living first. And it's been very disheartening this entire time of coronavirus to hear blatantly our leaders say things like, well, you know, maybe they just have to die and we have to deal with it.
I think it would be common sense that science is more important than going with your morals or what you think to be or believe to be correct.
There is so much information not only coming from the White House, but also in social media. Dr. Anthony Fauci is one of our best sources, along with Dr. Grossman here at Q News tonight. We have to make sure that we listen to him above all else, or we're in real trouble. Good evening again, America. It's 7 p.m. Thursday, May 14th, 2020. It is time to queer up the news, including
the staggering coronavirus facts for Thursday, May 14th, 2020. As America's LGBTQ COVID-19 deaths stand at 5,950.
How the LGBT community is suffering as crisis hotlines see dramatic rise in activity due to lockdown.
We report, Trump says, we are critical because we want him to keep the country closed until the election, because it's a political thing.
Watch tonight's good news as the BBC narrates the Penguin Parade.
Tonight we present Q's Q&A on coronavirus and the LGBT community, where we ask your questions from renowned Dr. Howard Grossman.
A disturbing report showing HIV infections on the rise in the trans community.
We have an exciting story as Maryland's Montgomery County Board of Education approves a landmark LGBTQ+ studies course in all their high schools.
And finally, the exciting big finish, a lightning round of fun LGBTQ stories. We are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of these stories we are going to tell this evening on Q News Tonight. tonight on the world's first live daily queer evening news show.
Tonight's news about the gay community and the news from an LGBTQ perspective. Are our gay stories important to you? In headlines, politics, entertainment, gay culture, travel, religion, and more. Reported by respected anchors.
Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight. Thank you for joining Q News Tonight. We are live. This is a live show, so anything can happen. Tonight we bring you the news of and a perspective from the LGBT community. Be sure to stay tuned as we bring you the amazing good news stories, even despite coronavirus pandemic. I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and this is my co-guest anchor, Misty Eyes, and anchor Napoleon Plays.
And next it's me, because we are proud to share with you that our LGBTQ television network supports the unique live broadcast of Sunshine Cathedral's Sunday Church Service, the world's most popular LGBTQ queer religious broadcast. And we are proud of our diverse 501c3 and charitable support.
So let's queer up the news. First, let's catch up on the news surrounding COVID-19 with our quarantine quickies. The first story tonight is our daily reporting of the coronavirus facts, especially important to the LGBT community. We begin by reporting on coronavirus case numbers. Based on the standard acceptance of 7% of population from the LGBT community, we report that our community in the world LGBT COVID-19 cases stand now at 312,778. America's LGBTQ COVID-19 cases stand for the first time just over 100,000. Total world cases of COVID-19 are over 4.4 million, and total USA cases stand over 1.4 million. We remind you that America is ground zero of the pandemic. The USA is 4.4% of the world's population, and today America is 32.1% of all the cases in the world. That percentage is slightly lower today. We next report on coronavirus deaths. The world LGBTQ COVID-19 deaths stand at 20,696. America's LGBTQ community COVID-19 deaths stand at 5,950. Total world deaths is 299,000. We're getting ready to cross a new threshold. Total USA deaths stand at 85,402. America is nearly a third of all the COVID deaths on the planet. Again, the USA is just 4.4% of the world's population and now has 28.4% of all of the world's deaths. That percentage is slightly higher today. President Trump and Vice President Pence have said a lot of ridiculous things about testing to the LGBT community, and we've prepared them. Watch this.
Importantly, anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests, and the tests are beautiful. Anybody that needs a test gets a test. And we, in addition to that, are giving out millions of tests, and every day we're doing it exponentially. We're picking up, and what we'll be doing in the very near future is going to certain areas of our country and do massive testing. It's not necessary, but it would be a good thing to have.
Don't you need that, though, Mr. President, to make sure people are safe going back to work? You don't want to send people back to the workplace.
We want to have it, and we're going to see if we have it. Do you need it? No. Is it a nice thing to do? Yes. Other countries do it, but they do it in a limited form. We'll probably be the leader of the pack.
So when you said 4 million tests 7 weeks ago, you were just talking about tests being sent out, not actually being completed? I'm a little confused.
John, I think they're precisely correct that in my first week on this job, we were informed that HHS, I believe IDT was the vendor, Admiral Giroir, that had distributed 1 million, was distributing another 4 million, and we believe they did. But again, those were tests that, frankly, but for the president's leadership, we'd still be waiting on those tests to be done in many cases.
So the Media likes to say we have the most cases, but we do by far the most testing. If we did very little testing, we wouldn't have the most cases. So in a way, by doing all of this testing, we make ourselves look bad.
The thought stream from the president on testing got worse today as he boarded Marine One. En route to boarding Marine One, he said, quote, "The reason we have more cases is because we have more tests." He thinks testing is causing coronavirus. So let's go to the testing facts. As of today, we have tested 10,313,000 total taken, and contact source tracing is even dramatically lower than that. But this continues to be a failure. We rated F for failure. There are 328 million Americans, which means we have only tested through today 3.1% of population. The medical community continues to recommend a testing rate should be a goal of 10% for reopening. Despite what Trump and Pence tell the LGBT community, testing and contact source tracing is the #1 solution to begin to solve the problem of pandemic. Q News Tonight recognizes our Hall of Fame states. Top states in testing are #3 North Dakota at 6.4%, #2 New York, and #1 Rhode Island has almost reached its plateau goal of 10% as #1. Q News Tonight also recognizes our Hall of Shame states doing the worst job in testing, and LGBT America, we continue to hope that you don't live in one of these states. #5, for the first time, Colorado, testing just 1.95% of population. #4, Ohio. #3, South Carolina. #2, Idaho. And #1, you know who I was getting ready to say.
Quarantined quickies. LGBTQ hotlines see dramatic rise in activity due to lockdown. Many people who identify as LGBTQ are experiencing lockdown differently than their heterosexual peers, especially those stuck in homophobic homes. And LGBTQ organizations around the world are seeing significant upticks in the calls for help. Switchboard, the UK's leading LGBT+ helpline, says it's receiving 20% more calls, emails, and instant messages than they did before the pandemic. And those numbers continue to rise.
According to Switchboard, transgender and gender nonconforming people are calling and messaging at an even higher rate. Additionally, the number of contacts via email and instant messaging are increasing dramatically because of concerns about being overheard on the phone. Social media apps like Twitter and communication apps like WhatsApp are seeing a surge in their use during COVID-19 as well.
Jennifer Okoba, who works for an LGBT organization called One Action Foundation in Nigeria, where homosexuality is criminalized, said her organization is overwhelmed by the number of people who need support. She reported most of them had requested money support and basic food. Okoba also said that people were just requesting that they don't really need anything, they just needed to talk to someone.
Canadians are also being disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, said Helen Kennedy, Executive Director of Canada's leading LGBTQ organization, Egale. They report a majority of the LGBT households, 53%, have been affected by layoffs or reduced hours as a result of the pandemic, compared to 39% of the overall Canadian population.
A new report here in America reports that mental health calls to LGBTQ+ health providers has increased in the first quarter of 2020 by 27%.
This is definitely alarming to hear that. Obviously, nobody wants to be in more crisis now. The whole world is in crisis because of COVID. In the US, obviously, we know that the leadership is making it worse. And apparently, as we're seeing here for the LGBT community, it can be even more problematic because numbers of abuse and factors of relationships like that are skyrocketing. So maybe it's an even more unsafe place if you are LGBT.
Today at SunServe, I got a call from a hospital who had a transgender male, 23-year-old, who was just kicked out of their house and had domestic violence issues from their parents, and asked me where they could go. And we have no help for transgender housing. And it was heartbreaking, but I couldn't help them. I suggested a couple shelters, but It's bad.
It's one of the most underreported stories in the COVID crisis is the mental health issues that are affecting the LGBT community and the population as a whole. It is so being underreported and under-recognized because we're focusing on the main health crisis, but we're going to see a tidal wave of mental health issues.
Yeah. Quarantine quickies. Wisconsin Supreme Court overrules stay-at-home order. We have a video for you. Watch this.
Wisconsin Supreme Court today struck down the state's stay-at-home order in a 4-3 decision, ruling it unlawful and unenforceable. The governor there is Tony Evers, and he joins me now by phone. Governor, I appreciate you joining us. This is new information. This is just coming out with just a short time ago. So you just put out a statement saying that Republican legislators have convinced 4 justices to throw our state into chaos. Do you think this decision is going to cost lives in your state?
Well, it's certainly not going to help.
The Wisconsin Supreme Court has overturned the state's stay-at-home order, ruling it unlawful and unenforceable in a high-profile win for the state's Republican-led legislature. In a 4-3 decision Wednesday, the court ruled that Democratic Governor Tony Evers' administration has overstepped its authority when the State Department of Health Services extended the order to May 26th. The ruling comes after the legislature's Republican leaders filed a lawsuit last month arguing that the order would cost Wisconsin residents their jobs and hurt many companies, asserting that if it was left in place, quote, our state will be in shambles.
Governor Evers' first response to the news was, quote, now we have no plan and no protections for the people of Wisconsin, and it puts our state into chaos. Republican Assembly Speaker Robert Vos and Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald claimed in a joint statement after filing their lawsuit that there was immense frustration regarding the extension of the order and that Evers has denied the people and a voice through his unprecedented administrative overreach.
Their statement said, unfortunately, that leaves the legislator no choice but to ask the Supreme Court to rein in this obvious abuse of power. President Donald Trump called the ruling a win for the state Thursday morning. To this Wisconsin LGBTQ community, we recommend extreme caution on what happens in your state related to the reopening plans next.
I am ceased to be amazed. You can't, everyone can be smart in their own minds, but it doesn't mean you have common sense. I must applaud their effort to try to do what they think is best, but I wish that everyone had common sense.
I think the one ray of light here, I'll give benefit of the doubt, the Supreme Court in Wisconsin is saying that the Democrats and the Republicans, the legislature and the governor must work together on their plan. That is the only ray of sunshine in this decision, and we give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, that should be a given, though. What we want to see happen is finding a safe way for them to reopen. I know I have friends in Wisconsin that are scared that this is what they're seeing happen and that don't feel safe telling their friends and their families to go out because of what's happening.
We continue in quarantine quickies by reporting Trump says critics want him to keep the country closed until the election because it's a political thing. We've prepared a package. Watch this.
Where they're in the house or in their apartment, they're not allowed. Some people are too tough on it. They're not allowed to go out. They can't. They're losing their jobs. We're not going to let it happen.
Do you think your critics want you to keep it closed going into the election?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a political thing. In addition, I think
because
some
they're
states,
saying you're putting money, business ahead of lives.
Yeah, no. I think the people that want to see the right thing happen, they agree with me. We have to get our country open.
In an interview that aired Thursday morning on Fox Business Network's Maria Bartiromo, President Trump said he believes his political critics want a slower reopening of the economy, not due to the coronavirus threat, but to hurt him in the politics of the November election. The president made those comments in the same interview where he said he disagrees with the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, on the measures needed to reopen schools.
When asked if he thinks his political opponents want him to keep the economy closed going into the presidential election, Trump says he does. Yeah, I do. I think it's a political thing. Trump told Bartiromo. When pushed on whether such a move would be putting money ahead of lives, Trump pushed back. Quote, the people that want to see the right thing happen, they agree with me. We have to get our country open.
Trump said, quote, you know, if it was up to some people, let's keep it closed for a long time and watch the United States go down the tubes. Not going to happen. Never going to happen on my watch. Trump also told in his conversation to Bartiromo that there are likely to be health effects of keeping people under stay-at-home orders for such a long time. According to the president, quote, we have to open our country. We have no choice. You know people are dying this way too. They're dying of this closure. Where they're in their house or in their apartment, they can't even go out.
You know, this is a good juxtaposition to the story we just told because, yes, without more being open, without states and cities opening more of what's available, people end up locked in their homes. Anyone with a mental health issue ends up increasing that, depression or just abuse, as we just went over in the last story. And it really is no clear answer because we do need our entire society to be thriving and we want people alive to do that. But what's the best way to get there? I know that we're going to have Dr. Grossman talk more about that later today, but it is a catch-22 where anything can seem like the wrong answer.
I just watched the President Trump clip that we just showed, and I thought from Ronald Reagan all the way through, all of the presidents since Ronald Reagan, what president speaks that way?
You know, cabin fever is real, but it doesn't kill you unless you're in The Shining. And if his theory was correct, if people were dying because they were locked in their houses and their apartments, what about people locked in prison cells?
Well, we queue up our segment called Coronavirus Good News now. After we finish quarantine quickies, we like to lighten it up a little. We've reported all of the statistics and facts for today, but now we want to report on the things that made us smile today, and we call it Coronavirus Good News.
Coronavirus Good News. BBC sports commentator narrates Penguin Parade. Okay, LGBTQ America, I know you're missing your sports in this pandemic. We all are, right? So we couldn't resist when we saw this story. With live sports now a scarce resource, BBC commentator Andrew Cotter has lent his distinctive voice to the fairy penguins of Phillip Island in Melbourne, Australia. He has narrated the birds nightly as they waddle back to their burrows, turning Australia's famous penguin parade into a high-stakes, long-distance race. This story has made us smile. And that makes this Q News Tonight's Coronavirus Good News. Watch this.
Welcome to Phillip Island, Victoria in Australia. What a setting we have for this great sporting contest, the Little Penguin Sea to Dune race. Nervous moments always as they gather on the beach, the tension mounting, and away they go. There's the defending champion, wearing his familiar navy blue and white, great waddling style. Another pre-race favourite though, losing touch with the pack. Maybe that's why. A few too many fish in the day's feeding. There's a familiar face, Skip McIntyre, 8 times a champion back in the 90s, a very successful coach now, keeping a keen eye on proceedings. This the leading group, 1 or 2 still able to put on a show for the camera, others just ploughing straight over it. Some resorting to shortcuts. Sad that cheating has crept into this beautiful sport. The judges will have a look at that. But up at the front, the pace is relentless, closing in on those sand dunes that will offer a bed for the night. The fatigue starting to tell. Who's got the finishing kick up on the outside? What a turn of pace from that one, whichever one it is. No answer from the rest, and he takes victory. What a win. There we are, into the Borough, building an extension with his winnings, and back tomorrow to try and defend his title.
We'd like to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living, here in Fort Lauderdale, for making this set in this living museum possible.
Tonight we are broadcasting from our studio set in the middle of the World AIDS Museum and Education Center. The museum is in Wilton Manors in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
We joke we're coming from the gayest place on planet Earth.
Well, it's time for part 9 of Q's Q&A on coronavirus and the LGBT community, May 14th. This special segment is designed to be unique in all of America to answer your questions about coronavirus for the LGBT community during this pandemic. Tonight we have an American pioneer in AIDS HIV medical treatment. With us is Dr. Howard Grossman, specialist in internal medicine with an emphasis on HIV. He was the former executive director of the American Academy of HIV Medicine. He had a private practice in Manhattan, which was one of the largest HIV practices in New York. He has become nationally recognized as an educator on HIV issues and as an advocate for LGBT civil rights and the rights of our community. He is an active doctor here in South Florida, and we encourage you to visit him and his practice at Midway Specialty Care Center with many offices in South Florida. Dr. Grossman is just blocks from our broadcast here at the World AIDS Museum. Welcome back, Dr. Grossman. Before we get into the viewer questions, it's been another big week from science and the medical community. I'm keenly interested with all of the news this week to hear your thoughts about the needs for retesting and the talk that is circling around it. Also, how does this relate to the antibody testing, which has been so big for happening out this week? And how do you define safety from reinfection? So let's begin with the 22 questions that I've just asked you tonight on cue.
Well, I want you to know I wore my drag tonight.
Right? Good.
I need you to explain that question a little bit more. So what are you talking about when you're talking about retesting?
Well, there's been a lot of conversation this week that the testing numbers that are reported are a static moment in testing. So when we today we've crossed 10 million tests in the United States. There's
5 million of which have been done in the White House.
Yes, right, exactly. A lot of people are saying that the testing regimen, as compared to other places in the world, is not working in the way that it should. We're not doing enough testing, 300,000 a day. But also, if long periods of time go since a test that you have, that there should be now discussions of a retesting process. Do you agree with that? That people should be retested once they've been tested?
Well, I mean, let's look at what the tests show, first of all. So you have the swab up the nose test. That's the polymerase chain reaction test that tests for acute infection. So that test can help us decide if somebody who presents to a hospital, for example, has COVID-19 or doesn't. If they don't, they may have some other thing like just plain old pneumonia. It can also help to identify asymptomatic people who are still in that infectious phase. So that's the purpose of that. Now, if you test negative on that test, tomorrow you could get infected. So yes, there is some need. If you were using that as your screening tool for whether people could come into an office or be back to work, that could change day to day. And so, today you're in the office and tomorrow you take the subway and you get infected and you come in. I mean, that old test didn't mean anything.
Help us go slow here on the observation you just meant, that you just put out there. We understand that. Is there any general recommendation you have in terms of the frequency of testing to create a safety feeling? You're not, I understand, I probably am using the wrong word, but is there a frequency of testing that we should be thinking about?
I don't think we know enough yet to say that.
Yeah.
And, truthfully, you could test people every single day. It depends on risk factors. It depends on exposure factors. With HIV testing, for example, there were people who wanted to get tested every week. You base testing a lot on behavior and risk, and I think we need to look at that a lot. But I think when people talk about reopening and having meetings in conference rooms, for example, we still don't have the tool to tell us whether that's safe or not.
We're in mid-May, May 14th. Are we in a situation where testing should still only be those people that are showing symptoms?
Right. Or it's people with symptoms, it's people in the high-risk categories, mostly older people with other comorbidities, other diseases, and it's frontline healthcare workers.
Yeah.
Those are the people that our testing is targeted at. I think we're at a point where we have enough equipment, at least in certain places, where we can start testing more widely. I've been doing it in my office, for example, because when this all first started from my laboratory, we would get 10 test kits at a time. It was very highly restricted. Now, I pretty much can get as many as I want. And so I've been testing a lot of people. I think one of the other things we're doing, and then other testing platform that we're looking at, is antibody testing. So we know that the majority of people who are infected will develop antibodies. There's a ton of questions, okay? Are the antibodies protective? How long will they last? How long will they be protective? Is there a threshold level of antibodies that we need to have? All these questions need to be answered. But I think we've talked here before that I think when you watch the press these days, they put a very negative spin on everything. One of my friends in New York calls it terror porn, and realize that the 24-hour news networks and most of the newspapers as well are looking to grab your eyeballs. They're looking to keep you frightened. They're looking to keep you off guard. They're looking to put the most negative spin on everything. You know, I mean, it's almost like you say, you listen to them and they'll report somebody sneezed in a town 2 towns away from you. It put you at risk.
Yeah. And I mean, or when it happens on air, sometimes you can feel that way too. But what you were saying is that the reality of it, especially as it comes to testing either for actual COVID or the antibodies for it, where just to recap a little bit, there's still being information that's found as to how frequent, but you personally are testing your facilities and the people that you work with about every week. Or every other week, correct?
I'm planning to actually, so in New York, for example, they're leading the way in that people who work in nursing homes are going to be tested twice a week. I think it would be very reassuring for my patients if my staff got tested once a week. Now, is that perfect? No. Could it be overkill? Yes. I don't know. We don't know. But we learn by doing, and this is one of the things we learned from the HIV epidemic. When you don't have enough information, you learn by doing. You try not to do harm to people. That's above all. But you learn by using these tests the best you can. So antibody tests, a lot of stuff we don't know. But we do have several facts that we do know. Aside from the Chinese, whose data is very suspect, there are no documented cases of people becoming reinfected with coronavirus. That's really important. We are 6 months out now from the discovery of this virus, and we don't have cases of reinfection. That seems reassuring to me. Number 2, we're collecting convalescent serum, so serum from people like me who had it even though I was asymptomatic, and have developed antibodies. So I donated my antibodies to be used and infused into very ill people. We're finding out that that's working.
By plasma is the question.
But that's the plasma, the convalescent plasma you hear about.
And all of this testing, both for the initial test, for the antibody test, and then if you want to donate plasma because you find out that you have it, I believe that you were telling me that all of that is done for free. Is that correct when it comes to COVID through the government?
The donation.
They pay you for donating plasma.
It's being done by the big blood banks. You go and you get, like, as if you're donating blood. They plasmapheresis. They give you your red blood cells back, but they take the plasma.
For the initial testing of COVID.
It didn't cost me anything.
It doesn't cost you anything, so people can come to see you and make sure that they get the testing done.
Yeah, the testing. No, the testing that we're doing as far as antibodies, that actually there's a charge for.
What is the charge?
Right now, it's about $100 a test. Okay.
And
insurance will cover it.
Yeah, America, as you know, we had quite a situation this week. Josie and Napoleon and I were tested on Monday, the antibody test. We went because Josie was being tested because she had tested for COVID-19 a second time at 40 days, and the antibody test was required, was important to identify that. It turns out that she did have the antibodies. Shockingly, it turned out I had the antibodies and tested positive in the antibody test, which meant I was also asymptomatic, like Dr. Grossman was, and Napoleon had tested negative. and has had now another antibody test to verify the accuracy of it.
Right. So let's talk about accuracy for a second,
Yeah.
because there was important news the last couple of days as well. A study out of, or just an examination of cases out of New York, of NYU, your alma mater, Napoleon, once again, it said that up to 50% of tests using the Abbott platform, which is the one that's most widely out there, looking for acute infection, is giving false negatives, which means that people are actually maybe infected, but they're coming back negative. Abbott went nuts over this, of course, and says it's all NYU's fault and they don't know what they're doing, but I doubt that that's really the case. The fact is that and we talked about this weeks ago, that platform was pushed out with no validation. There was no external validation. The Abbott refused to talk about the sensitivity and specificity, very important for testing platforms. And Trump and his cohort pushed that test, bought thousands of machines, and which convinced hospitals to buy even more thousands of machines. And now they're all stuck using that test. Now, the lab that I use is Quest, like Quest and LabCorp, BioReference, all the big labs are doing testing. I do know from Quest that they are using two different modalities. So they are using the Abbott, but they're also using something called Euroimmune, another company. And that, to me, increases the validity of the test. Plus, they've done more validation of the test, at least in-house. But we really need the FDA to really be stepping up to the plate here and validating the test. There are so many tests out there. Misty, you took a rapid finger stick test looking for antibodies. So many of those tests, we don't know the accuracy of them. You really have to take those with a grain of salt.
We reported that there were over 150 that were on the market, and less than 10 were even seen by the FDA last year.
Yeah, we have tons of questions from viewers. I want to move on, but anything else? Napoleon's still in limbo land on the antibody test. Anything else on antibodies?
Napoleon came back negative. I really want to emphasize this. And Misty, on her test, came back negative. You were all in the room with Ron. Remember, this is not one-to-one infection. As I've said to Napoleon, if you look at, we think of HIV as being very high risk, okay, and condomless anal intercourse being a tremendous risk. Well, it turns out the risk is 1 in 250 episodes. Now, you could get it the first time, okay? So that sounds...
I want to make sure that I draw attention to what you just said. You're talking about a coronavirus.
No, he's talking about HIV.
No, I'm about HIV.
Okay,
and sorry, we think of that as being, so even HIV is not one-to-one. It's not every time that you have sex you're going to get HIV. It's 1 in 250. And it's not with this. So you were all in the room, and 50% of you seem to have become positive. That's a very high risk of transmission, but it doesn't. There's nothing special about that.
Well, let me ask more specifically then, as it relates to me and others who are around others in this kind of context. I was around Ron frequently. I was around Josie all the time. And I essentially lived with Al. We worked together so much. And that was back before we were taking the kind of protocols that we started taking afterward. Right. He mentioned the coughing that he had. I was near him all of the time. Is there any possibility that it's a lot harder for me to catch COVID, and that's part of what we're determining, that maybe different age groups or something about me makes it harder for me to catch it in the first place?
No,
because I was highly exposed around many people that had it for a long period of time.
No idea. And really look at my office. I didn't know that I had it either, and I was around them for the first 12 days after I got tested. Not one of them tested
I have to draw attention to what has just happened in the last 15 seconds. And I want to point out, Dr. Grossman says, I have no idea. You have concerns in terms of the circle of why you would not be infected. This moment is exactly what we're watching in social media. And I just want to draw attention to this. We announced that we were doing the antibody test. We gave the results of the antibody test. We reported it as accurately as we could. Frankly, I think Q News Tonight has done as good a job as any outlet, LGBT outlet, in all of America in terms of trying to propel accurate information.
Forget LGBT.
I
I said to you, you guys are the inoculation against terror porn.
Yeah, and we greatly appreciate you saying that. But I was shocked in social media, almost instantaneously, there was a tidal wave of why the information we were reporting was not correct. And when I would challenge them of saying, well, where are you getting this opinion? It was, well, I heard, or I got shared, or something I saw someplace. The misinformation is just dramatic, and it's interesting because I just watched it. An accurate answer, we don't know that yet. But we take assumption of what we've seen in the past, and until studies are complete, this is best guess. And medical professionals at this point are super valuable to us, especially in the LGBT community, for best guess. And we'll continue to get to your conclusion. I want to move on to our questions because there are so many. And before we move to viewer questions, let's do the Q News Tonight question. Over the last couple of weeks, we've continued to ask you how the federal government's response to COVID-19 has been. You've said some very negative things. We continue to hope that they improve, so let me start there. Has the USA's and our federal response improved from the F- rating that Congressman Shalala, the former HHS secretary, gave, and the F- rating that you gave over the past weeks? Over the last week since we saw you last, has it improved?
Can we give it a G or an H or something like that? An X? You know, truthfully, when you're talking about a president who is pushing reopen, who is supporting gun-toting extremists who invade Capitol buildings, then our response is worse. When you reported on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, in that case was decided in violation of Constitution, in violation of settled law. Four conservative Republicans basically decided to create a Wild West situation in Wisconsin that violated every tradition of public health. Remember that the head of the Wisconsin Supreme Court said about an outbreak in an area that had a meatpacking factory. Well, that was the meatpackers. That wasn't the regular people. So the regular people, that means rich white people. I mean, when you start talking that kind of language, you start to understand why they're doing this. So I had a patient come into my office. This was interesting yesterday. A transgender woman. And was angry that we made her put a mask on. I don't understand this. She's a transgender sex worker. She's been going around the country continuing her sex work. She was angry she had to wear a mask, and she didn't think this was appropriate. And she said, "Isn't this killing the right people?" And I thought, honey, you are the people they want to kill more than anybody. No. How can you think? So when you ask these questions about how can people be like this, that's what's happening. That's the kind of selfishness, the kind of lack of empathy that's out there these days.
All right. So in summary, anyway. For this week, we're going to use the grade of G, which Dr. Grossman has invented for the first time. But we'll come back to you next week and continue to do that.
Royale.
Let's jump right into our viewer questions.
Yes. The first viewer question for you. What do you think of Mitch McConnell's claim that Obama left Trump unprepared for a pandemic?
You mean Putin's other puppet? Moscow Mitch. Mitch McConnell will say anything and lie about anything in order to keep power. Let's face it. President Obama had an integrated plan in place. There was a 68-page plan that the Trump administration just basically threw out the window. Yeah. They basically destroyed the infrastructure. There were 700 unfilled positions at CDC. Okay, they destroyed our monitoring positions around the world, in China especially, where actually many diseases originate or jump from animals to people. And, Mitch is he has to go.
Yeah,
I mean, we need to give money to his opponent.
It was reported by Obama that his team met with Trump's team right as they were changing over hands, and then all of those advisors are now no longer working with Trump. So what good did it do? Because he fired all of the people.
Right. And truthfully, I think Joe Biden should have those people around him every day talking. Anybody who Trump fires, he should hire.
Another viewer question. How dangerous is the Wisconsin Supreme Court's decision to disallow their stay-at-home order?
Like I said earlier, it's very dangerous. It really creates a Wild West situation where people have no idea how to direct themselves, where people who are actively trying to shelter, and the vast majority of people in Wisconsin were completely in favor of the governor's moves. This is a minority, again, of empathy-deficient, rich white people, basically, making these decisions, and the gun-toting people following them, and they're going to put everybody at risk. It really is a disaster waiting to happen. And Wisconsin has been fantastic at controlling this so far.
Well, good luck to everybody in Wisconsin. The next viewer question. How serious should the LGBT community take Fauci when he says reopening states could lead to death and suffering?
We have to. As I said, I've been doing a lot of testing. The vast majority of patients that I'm seeing have no exposure yet to coronavirus. So let's remember this. Social distancing, isolation, quarantine, all the stuff we've done the last 2.5 months has worked.
Yeah.
And it's kept people from getting infected. So we're going to open things now, and, potentially we're back to January again. I think there's a difference. I think we've learned, those of us with a brain have learned ways to protect ourselves, which we didn't know in January.
Yeah, that can be scary.
But the numbers are going to go through the roof, and they're already going through the roof. You're opening, if you look at the national numbers, they include a lot of, New York has a disproportionate impact on those numbers. New York has been going down significantly in new infections. That skews that whole curve. If you take the New York numbers out, this country is going like this, literally going like this. And we're reopening when we're on this upward swing of the curve. What do you think is going to happen?
And we see that those numbers are reported in those states as
But
well that are reopening.
Right.
Ms. Deanna, you have another.
But remember that also Fauci was talking about reopening schools. And what he said was there isn't going to be a vaccine by the fall, which is absolutely true. And we're finding new things that are affecting children. So this is a scary time for the president then to go out and say, oh, this doesn't affect children. He said it right afterwards. He said, this doesn't affect children. They do fine. It's older people and the older professors.
The initial,
right.
When it first came out, that was one of the first things we heard was children were safe and pregnant women were safe. We heard in the very, very
And now we're finding out different.
Another viewer question. What do you think about China's response to the latest Wuhan outbreak cluster? They plan on testing 11 million people in the next 10 days.
Yeah, 1 million people a day. Well, China can do great things because they can cut corners. They put up buildings in no time, but then, of course, some of those buildings collapse. But then again, they don't have the same safety regulations that we do. It's great to live in a dictatorship, isn't it?
Is it possible that they could do 1 million a day?
I don't put much past them because many people buy into the system there, number one, and number two, they'll terrorize you if you don't. So can they line up 1 million people a day? That's an awful lot of testing. You need an awful lot of testers, an awful lot of equipment.
Yeah, we're only doing 300,000 entirely in our entire country.
Right.
The next question. Are health organizations taking into account asymptomatic people from antibody tests in their statistics of the pandemic?
So you're asking who gets measured.
Yeah.
Anybody who gets a test result, any test result that goes through a laboratory is going to be reported to the health department. As a physician, I'm supposed to report every other test, even if I'm doing rapid tests. As a finger stick, I'm required by law to report that to the health department.
Does that mean you and I are reported as a COVID case?
Oh, yeah.
It is?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, I got a call from the health department. You may get one soon, too. When it first happened, asking me my risk and everything else, and I told the woman, what I knew. But they, and I hope people don't freak out when they hear from the health department, because these people are trying to do a yeoman's job to figure out how we can stop this. So don't freak out. They're not going to put you in a camp somewhere.
No, they're going to ask him for us, so we're going to end up in a camp somewhere.
But that's what contact tracing is all about.
And that should be done.
And we need more of it.
Another viewer question.
Yes.
What are unexpected public health consequences that are not getting enough coverage?
Well, I'll give you one good thing, actually, is that this is probably the first time in modern history when people stopped having casual sex as much as they usually do. So the baths are closed down, the bars are closed down, the back rooms are closed down, the sex clubs are closed down, and people have been sheltering at home.
Did you see the little tear forming on Napoleon's cheek?
He actually served as my psychiatrist the other day, too, as I cried over this.
So now would be a great time for everyone to go get tested, because
for
they probably haven't had
STDs and HIV.
It's a big reset time, you're saying.
It's reset. It's reset. Imagine what could happen if everybody got tested, everybody who has an STD got treated. We haven't been going up on the scale because people haven't been having a lot of sex outside. If you're in a monogamous relationship, a truly monogamous relationship, not a monogamish one, then you don't need to get tested. But everybody else, we can break the back on the syphilis and gonorrhea, chlamydia.
Our next question from viewer.
Yep.
How will technological advances impact the future of COVID-19 treatment?
Well, there's so many technological advances. I mean, one of the tests that came out today, I have to read it because,
I know there was a robot dog helping people keep social distance in parts of Asia.
Right.
I saw the video in Britain of the experimentation of dogs being able to smell COVID-19 in a person.
Oh, wow.
And it had like an 80% success rate.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But, for example, there's something called CRISPR technology. And CRISPR, that's why I have to look at my phone. It stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. They're DNA sequences that can be targeted both for diagnostic and treatment for people. And there's a new diagnostic test that was approved by the FDA that uses this new CRISPR technology to identify sequences of RNA, the viral genetic material. And it apparently can be done in an hour. It's faster than some of the other technology, and according to the stuff that I was reading, it's supposedly even more accurate and less expensive. So we're going to see new ways of testing coming up. That's one thing. We're going to see new medications developed. Remember, every pharmaceutical company has what they call libraries of thousands of molecules, and they can now, with robotic technology, run through these drugs and test them against the coronavirus like crazy. And you could better believe that they're doing it looking for the blockbuster.
And speaking of newer, I know, Mr. Your next question is about newer medicine.
Yeah. Actually, if you don't mind, I want to ask a short personal question for Napoleon. Just his quick guess, he's tested negative for antibodies. The new test has been done. And it's a pure guess on your part. Is it going to come back negative a second time? Would your guess be that?
My guess would be that he didn't have it, but
Not
we'll see.
having
But we'll see. I mean,
Sorry, Mom, I can't come visit you.
There are false positives and false. Well, we have to talk about that. But one piece of good news this week that we got, and this is very preliminary, but there was a report of a study from Hong Kong of 127 patients, a small study, where they gave people were randomized to either get lopinavir or ritonavir, which people will know as the drug Kaletra that we've used in HIV, along with a nucleoside analog and interferon beta. Now, interferon beta is used to treat multiple sclerosis. And it works because it decreases inflammatory responses. And one of the things we know with COVID-19 is that that's been one of the Achilles' heels, is the immune responses going out of control. So they found that people developed a negative PCR test in about 40% faster 40% of the time, people who just took the lopinavir or ritonavir. So that's very preliminary results, but it says to us that even some of the antiviral drugs that we already have, used in the right combination, may have efficacy.
Speaking of drugs, some believe, and this is a viewer's question.
And this is our final question from viewer.
Okay. Some believe newer medicines have inherent risks. What would you say to a person that the brand of a new COVID-19 test is safe when it arrives? Do we even need a vaccine if it does arrive?
Well, two separate questions. I will go for the second one first. We're not going to break the back of this until we have a vaccine. And it's going to take, I would say it's going to take an easy 2 years. I mean, they are working as fast as they can. But you need to study these in large numbers of people. You start out studying it in small numbers of healthy people just to see if it makes sure it doesn't kill people.
Phase 1 and Phase 2.
Phase 1 and Phase 2. And then you start looking for efficacy. And by the time you're pre-approval, you're talking about studies with thousands of people. Okay, so you really have safety data. That's how the drug approval process works. They are not going to put any old vaccine in people not knowing that it works and not knowing that it's safe. So, the whole anti-vaxxer argument here is really specious. And the fact that these anti-vaxxers are glomming onto this the way they are is I think, treasonous. I think it's genocidal to try to talk people out of this. I can't use enough bad words for what these people are already setting the stage for. But testing works because we don't just throw drugs out at people, unlike the president who goes to tell you to take hydroxychloroquine this week and bleach the next. That's not how science works.
Well, that is this week's Q&A on coronavirus and the LGBT community. We are here every Thursday night with your questions. We want to thank Dr. Howard Grossman, and again, we encourage you, South Florida, to visit Midway Specialty Care. He's just down the street from the World AIDS Museum. And we especially thank Dr. Grossman because he's had quite a week with us. He's probably sick to death of us because of Josie's test and then me turning out to have antibodies and Napoleon turning out not to have antibodies in the testing. So he's really gone above and beyond the call of duty this week.
Thanks,
Gay, you're a gay doctor.
As gay as they come.
Gay as they come. So we thank you again, and absolutely.
Thanks. Can I just say one thing to your viewers that I think we need to say every single week, and that is, again, you're watching science as it happens. That's not the way we usually learn about science as lay people. Right. Listen to the authorities, listen to the scientists, listen to the epidemiologists. A lot of confusion going on. Take a deep breath and just listen, but take a deep breath, because we realize the media is out to terrorize you and keep you eyeballs.
The point of what I just heard you say loud and clear is Facebook is not your doctor. So try to listen to...
What about your doctor's Facebook?
Right, all right. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Grossman, and we'll see you next Thursday night at 7 o'clock. We continue into some of our big stories tonight by queuing up the world. We report tonight that Brazil's Supreme Court rules against gay blood donor ban in an historic ruling.
The top court in Brazil ruled the country's ban on men who have sex with men from donating blood is unconstitutional. Reuters reported 7 of the 11 judges who sit on the Brazilian Supreme Court ruled in favor of lifting the ban, which prohibits men who have sex with men from donating blood for 12 months.
Ali Asa, National LGBTI+, a Brazilian LGBTQ advocacy group, described the ruling as historic. The Supreme Court issued its ruling against the backdrop of the global coronavirus pandemic.
The new policy allows them to become blood donors if they have not had sex with another man for 3 months, as opposed to 12 months under the previous policy. that had been in effect since 2015. The president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, who has been sharply criticized for his rhetoric against the LGBT community and LGBT Brazilians, women, and other underrepresented groups, has downplayed the pandemic's threat to his country and spoken out against measures designed to curb its spread.
You know, what's most interesting here is that we still have a ban of, I think, 9 months before gay men can donate. I know it's temporarily shortened while coronavirus has been in effect, but that's still 3 months versus, oh, your blood is going to get tested anyway. We don't need to discriminate against you just because you've had sex with a male. I've known that when I've had to do this, I've had to lie and say that I didn't have sex with a guy just so I could be able to donate blood. I'm a universal donor.
I remember when I first went to donate blood, it asked if I had had sex with a man after 1976. And I was like, what? Of course I have. And they're like, you can't donate blood. And then it became a woman, and now I donate all the time.
It's one of the few good news stories for the LGBT community that I see come out of Brazil. Almost everything that I see come out of Brazil about LGBT is bad and negative.
They're ahead of us.
We queue up the USA by reporting HIV infections are on the rise in the trans community. Misty, tell us what's going on.
Yeah. Our LGBTQ media partners at the Washington Blade report that for the first time, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is including data on transgender people in its reports on HIV infections, and the results show a gradual increase in new cases of the disease over the past several years, compared to previous reports that placed transgender people in the same category as either male or female. The latest iteration of total diagnoses of HIV infection in the United States, made public Thursday, contains an entire section devoted to transgender people.
The inclusion of the transgender data is part of the CDC's first ever inclusion of national level data by gender in the report. But the news for transgender people is not good. Overall, the number of reported new infections increased 10% from 2014 to 2018. The diagnoses accounted for about 2% of the new HIV infections in the United States, according to the CDC.
Harper Jean Tobin, Director of Policy for the National Center for Transgender Equality, said, quote, "To combat these disparities, we must take action against the discrimination and stigma that drive them and invest in economic opportunity, equal access to health care for the most vulnerable population." We continue by queuing up the USA tonight by reporting that Montgomery County, Maryland's Board of Education approves an LGBTQ studies course. We've prepared a package on this interesting development. Watch this.
This pilot proposal comes as a result of strong interest from teachers, students, and other stakeholders to offer an elective course known as LGBTQ plus studies. With support from my team, the group has already developed a preliminary course description that includes interdisciplinary exploration of LGBTQ plus identity, history, and culture in 4 proposed units as a social studies elective. Once approved, teachers, students, and nationally recognized experts will continue to shape the development of the course prior to implementation.
Maryland's Montgomery County Board of Education on Tuesday unanimously approved the development of a 1-semester LGBTQ studies pilot course. The course summary includes an amazing line. The LGBTQ plus community faces enduring discrimination that has resulted in a rise in hate crimes against them, higher rates of depression, suicide, and addictive drug use.
The course aims to bring acceptance, support, and a stronger sense of shared community among our students of all sexual and gender identities. Mark Eckstein, chair of the Montgomery County Council of Parent-Teacher Association's LGBTQ committee, is contributing his efforts and advice towards building the curriculum because, in his words, once you learn about these folks and these experiences and the culture, it's much more difficult to act in ways that are offensive.
According to a memo from Superintendent Jack R. Smith, 2 high schools intend to offer this next spring, while 8 others plan to offer it in the following year. This pilot program should be closely watched by the 13,000 school districts in the United States of America.
Yeah, Maryland has a really good school districts overall. That's part of how I ended up growing up there. And they have, highs and lows. It's a mixed state, just like in Florida. But overall, even if it's Republican run right now, they've got a lot more highs. This is incredible. I can't imagine what life would have been like if we had LGBTQ studies growing up. Now, there's also some negatives in Maryland where they will, if you teach abstinence only in health, they fund your school more. But most schools don't tend to do that. So I look forward to where else this is going to be taught.
Unfortunately, I did grow up in a school that taught abstinence only. And when I started to have LGBTQ thoughts and desires and realizing I was different from my peers, I became suicidal. And I think that this program will show the students that are struggling that they're not alone, and that's very important.
It's historic. It's simple as that. It's a historic moment. We are going to end tonight's broadcast with The Big Finish, short story mentions of LGBTQ news and news of a gay perspective. So here we go. First on Q News tonight's The Big Finish. Judge in Michael Flynn's case refuses to dismiss charges.
Just like the charges that the TV won't dismiss right now. A judge said that he would be a gatekeeper and that a criminal proceeding is not a free-for-all. It's not supposed to be. I know what a criminal free-for-all means. Cue up the Hunger Games. Maybe you'd feel a little bit better at home, America, about our leaders if you knew that they had what it took to survive until the end. Just imagine McConnell, Trump, Pence, and 9 others on an island trying to survive. I know it's unbelievable. There's no way they could figure out that their island was actually a clock if they can't read a watch or a report about expected death tolls on coronavirus in the first place. But hey, wouldn't that expect why they think they're reacting so quickly now to corona? They just can't read.
We are live, ladies and gentlemen. So Flynn admitted to lying to the FBI about conversations he had with Russia's then ambassador to the United States, and he has pled guilty. I don't understand.
Well, first, at the Republican National Convention, he led the chant, "Lock her up, lock her up." Second, he conspired with Russia. Third, he lied to the FBI and the vice president. Fourth, he confessed to everything. Fifth, still is somehow he is going to get away with it. That's a strong candidate for Republican nominee for president in 2024, if I've ever heard of one. The Big Finish. Lawyers want a judge to recuse himself because he won't refer to a transgender woman as males.
Yeah, the 3 of them. We've covered this story a few times. The judge says he won't call these male-to-female students as simply males because it's incorrect and it doesn't paint the full picture. I think the whole country can relate to this one. When back in 2016, a man took office who didn't actually win enough votes to be called president. You could just say President Trump, but it doesn't really paint the full Russian picture, now does it?
Misgendering someone is an act of violence, and I applaud this judge for standing his ground. I personally have been to many courts with my clients at SunServe, and their ID often says male and their name often says male. And when they get to court and the judge is like, "Where's Tom Smith?" and then they shyly raise their hand and he looks at them and says, "Are you Tom Smith?" and they embarrassingly say yes, and he's like, "All right, ma'am, what happened?" And when they switch genders, here in Fort Lauderdale, we're very open-minded, hopefully, most of our judges, but every client that I've been with, a judge has properly gendered them by the way they are presenting in court. That is amazing. Imagine if you were a different marginalized community and somebody used wetback or spick or, I don't want to say anymore, but a Jewish or black racist. Would you want to stand in front of that judge? Would you feel like he was on your side and you were about to have the right to a fair trial?
That's a good point.
Proof you don't have to be intelligent to get your daddy to pay your way through law school. The Big Finish. U.S. weekly jobless claims hit 3 million this week, bringing the 8-week total to more than 36 million.
That's almost 1/10 of all Americans of all ages included. We got out of the Great Depression in part with huge numbers of jobs created in infrastructure, like the Hoover Dam. Can you imagine now that 1/10 of the population, probably at home on their smartphones, are being called to action for physical labor. Oh shit, maybe that's how they end up being called the eyes or guards, like in The Handmaid's Tale. They're there on every corner. That's how we become their cronies, because we're out of work first. This is how it starts.
You know, this number is really much, much higher than we are reading. Many people have been trying to file that cannot even file. Opening up our economy,
This headline in November 2019 would have led every news broadcast in the world. Today it only makes our big finish. That shows you we are numb, and that is sad. We have been covering the unemployment spiral longer than most relationships have lasted in the quarantine America. This is the new normal. Brace yourself, America. The big finish. No context Thursday. The Trump administration says a new bailout program will help 35 million Americans. It probably won't.
Help can be a pretty vague word, and I know Trump loves those vague words. If I'm reaching for an item on the top shelf, and then somebody else comes by, seemingly able to reach it, and offers me help, I might think that they're going to hand me that said item. But instead, they could just cut off my arm and tell me, there, now you don't have the temptation. Let's be careful with our words, because what help actually means could be a very dangerous thing.
neither my husband or I have gotten our stimulus check. I'm not going to hold my breath on this one.
Come on. Trump has kept most of his campaign promises. I mean, the only ones he hasn't kept are
all of them.
Repealing Obamacare, creating targeted child care tax credits, changing the name of Mountain Alley back to Mount McKinley, saving the coal industry, bringing back manufacturing, growing the economy 4% a year, establishing a commission on radical Islam, removing existing Syrian refugees, eliminating the federal debt in 8 years, balancing the federal budget, administering Medicaid through block grants, stopping AT&T and Time Warner's merger, cutting the number of tax brackets, canceling all funding of sanctuary cities, being a decent human being, and wait, that was on my wish list for him. Sorry, even the Don wasn't so bold to claim to do that as president. Oh, wait, and of course, Mexico paying for the wall. He'll get to all of this in his second term.
Ah, evil words.
The big finish. Happy 51st birthday to Cate Blanchett.
Oh my God, I am going to nerd out over Cate Blanchett. She has been able to be in so many amazing movies. Queen Elizabeth, Thor, she was Hela, Jeanette in Blue Jasmine, Carol in Carol. She is a multi-Academy Award winner. If you haven't seen Notes on a Scandal, she plays Sheba, but she's in The Lord of the Rings and Ponyo and Robin Hood and Jungle Book and Cinderella and Ocean's 8. Her career is so expansive, she would need Meryl Streep to play her in a biopic. I love you, Cate Blanchett.
You can see her right now in Mrs. America, which is an amazing show where she's not quite so much an ally, but in real life she is an ally. And if you claim to be an ally, you can't sit by idly and quiet. You have to speak up and defend when somebody is misgendering or somebody is talking bad. You can't be silent. And she proved she was an ally on Jimmy Kimmel when he was questioning her about her gay, lesbian sex scenes in the movie Carol. And she said, yes, Jimmy, girls have been having sex with girls and boys have been having sex with boys for a very long, long time.
I loved her in Thor Ragnarok. Always. I'm a fan of hers. The big finish. On this day in 1787, delegates gather in Philadelphia to draw up the U.S. Constitution.
Pixar didn't happen. I don't believe this kind of nonsense. Every time I turn on the news, I hear about what the Constitution is supposed to say, how it's supposed to be our governing law, and how the current administration says papooey with that nonsense. As far as I'm concerned, this is as real as Bigfoot, the Island of Dogs, or Santa Claus. I don't buy it. There's no Constitution.
You know, it was actually supposed to be done on May 14th, but they didn't have quorum. And James Madison reported the small number had to re-meet on May 25th.
I suggest you vote for someone who reads the Constitution. From president all the way down to local government, influence your community because you matter.
Well, that's it for tonight's episode of Q News Tonight, the world's first live daily gay evening news TV show.
Remember, if it's important to the LGBTQ community, it's important to Q News Tonight. But you must help us. Click subscribe on YouTube and share this news.
We are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. This is the only source of live LGBT news in the world. Your community needs your support.
You are not alone.
We will get through this crisis.
We are here for you.
And this is Q News Tonight.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Al Ferguson, and on behalf of Misty Eyes and Napoleon Plays, we will see you daily at 7 p.m. Good night.